Get a job, you bum. One of group of teens passed by laughing loudly. The old man lay curled on a park bench wrapped in a faded army jacket, his hands trembling from the morning cold. A city worker muttered, "That guy's been here for years. He's just part of the trash now." By noon, security was called to remove him. No one offered help, just stares, whispers, and disgust. But exactly 24 hours later, the skies above the park thundered. A Black Hawk helicopter descended, kicking up dust and leaves. Startled crowds gathered. Soldiers poured out in full gear. One high-ranking officer walked straight toward the same bench and saluted. "Sir, we've been looking for you," he said. The crowd froze. Phones came out. Whispers turned to silence. Who was this man they'd all dismissed as nothing? They were about to find out. Frank Holloway had lived in Riverside Park for so long that no one could remember exactly when he arrived. At 76 years old, he had become part of the scenery, like the cracked sidewalk beneath the elm trees, or the rusted bench no one sat on anymore. People in the neighborhood called him Old Ghost because he barely spoke and moved so quietly it was as if he drifted through the world unseen. He was always alone. He didn't beg, didn't shout, didn't engage with the chaos around him. While others passed through the park with phones, dogs, or jogging shoes, Frank remained a silent figure under the same tree, bundled in a faded military-issue sleeping bag that had long lost its shape and color. Unlike other homeless individuals, Frank never held a sign. He never asked for change. If someone offered money, he'd either nod politely and refuse or simply ignore the gesture. The only thing he consistently accepted was leftover food, usually from Leo's diner across the street. Each evening, one of the staff members would quietly leave a brown paper bag near the park's edge. Inside were bits of toast, scrambled eggs, or sometimes a sandwich. Frank always picked it up without a word and disappeared back into the trees. Every morning, without fail, Frank would sit upright before the sun fully rose. He'd stare into the sky for several minutes, unmoving eyes locked on something far beyond the clouds. Then softly, so softly that no one could make out the words, he would whisper something under his breath. The ritual never changed, no matter the weather, no matter who was watching. Rain or shine, Frank looked to the sky and spoke to it. Some said he was praying. Others thought he was reliving old memories. A few believed he was just lost in his own mind. But no one dared ask. Those who tried rarely received more than a faint smile or a slow shake of the head. Frank kept a few personal items with him. A canvas backpack that never left his side, a small metal tin sealed tight with duct tape, and around his neck, hidden beneath layers of clothing, a set of worn military dog tags that only a few sharp eyes had ever noticed. Some claimed they saw a faint emblem stitched inside his sleeping bag, an insignia faded by time, barely legible, but they weren't sure what it meant. Occasionally, other homeless veterans passed through the park. Most didn't stay long, but a few would nod at Frank from a distance, sometimes even offer a salute. He never returned the gesture, but his posture would straighten slightly when they did. There was something familiar in the way he carried himself, disciplined, methodical, quiet, like a man who had once worn a uniform and never really took it off in his mind. To the local community, Frank was just that old homeless guy in the park. Children were warned not to go near him. Joggers avoided his bench. Security guards from nearby shops occasionally tried to chase him off, though he always returned. No one knew where he went when he vanished for a day or two, but he always came back, always to the same spot, under the same tree, facing the same patch of sky. He spoke to no one. He asked for nothing. And yet every morning he watched the heavens like he was waiting for something or someone. And whatever it was, it hadn't come. Not yet. It started with laughter. Late on a Tuesday morning, the park was unusually crowded. The sun had finally broken through days of overcast skies, and with it came students, skipping class, couples enjoying early lunch breaks, and the all-too-familiar sound of teenagers filming each other on their phones. 3 boys and 2 girls, all around 16 or 17, walked along the edge of Riverside Park. One of them, wearing a hoodie too bright for the season, held up his phone and narrated with the enthusiasm of someone pretending to be famous. "Yo, check it out, people," he said into the camera. "Live from Riverside, and what do we have here? Old Ghost in his natural habitat." The camera swung toward the tree line, zooming in on a bench where Frank Holloway sat silent as ever. He wasn't sleeping, just watching the sky as he always did. His backpack sat neatly at his side, and his sleeping bag was folded across his knees. "Say something, man," the boy shouted. "Still filming?" "Yo, you alive or what?" The others laughed. Maybe he's a robot, one of the girls joked. Look at him, doesn't even blink. He's not a robot, another boy chimed in. He's a leftover. A leftover, the girl asked. Yeah, leftover from the last century. The group erupted into laughter again. One of them kicked a pebble toward the bench. It bounced and landed at Frank's feet. He didn't move. Dude, this is gold, the kid with the phone said. Watch this go viral. They continued circling the bench, tossing out insults and imitating his posture. One girl mockingly sat cross-legged on the grass and mimicked Frank's quiet skyward gaze. He's probably watching for alien spaceships, she said. That's when Leo, the daytime security guard from the shopping center across the street, walked by and spotted the commotion. He was in his late 50s, heavy-set, and wore a badge that didn't carry legal weight, but gave him enough authority to make people uncomfortable. What's going on here? Leo barked, adjusting his belt. The teens laughed nervously and backed off slightly. Just talking to the old guy, one of them muttered. Leo looked at Frank, then back at the group. You've made your point. Move along. The kids didn't argue. They wandered off, still smirking, one of them giving a final mocking salute toward Frank. Before disappearing down the walking path, Leo turned back to Frank. Frank, he said with a sigh, you know we've had complaints. Families are nervous. People want to enjoy the park. Frank didn't respond. I've got to call this in. Leo continued. Park supervisors are getting pressure from the city. They want all non-residents cleared out. He didn't wait for an answer. Leo radioed it in. Less than 10 minutes later, a city patrol car pulled up to the curb. Two officers stepped out, one young, clearly new to the bum, and the other older, his face worn from years of telling people to move along. The older officer approached Frank. Sir, he began, I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings. You can't stay here any longer. Frank didn't argue. Slowly, with the stiffness of a man decades into chronic pain, he leaned forward and began to gather what little he owned. First came the sleeping bag folded with military precision despite its tears. Then the canvas backpack, old but kept clean. And finally, from beneath the bench, he retrieved two worn items. One was a pair of combat boots, cracked leather soles, barely intact laces tied in perfect knots. The other was a small, tarnished military badge, its edges chipped, one corner missing entirely. It looked like it had once belonged on a uniform, but now it was held together by a keyring and a string of wire. He packed them carefully, almost reverently. No one watching said a word. The patrol officers didn't mock him. They didn't offer help either. They stood quietly until he was ready. Frank slung the bag over his shoulder, nodded once, and began walking out of the park. Slow, steady, as if he had done this before. People along the sidewalk barely noticed. A man selling hot dogs looked up, blinked, then looked away. A woman on her lunch break scrolled through her phone, too busy to notice a veteran being erased from a park bench. A mother pulled her child a little closer, whispering something about those kinds of people. We've grown used to seeing people through the dirt on their coats, but never through the weight behind their eyes. Frank didn't flinch. He didn't turn around. And as he passed the gates of Riverside Park, the space where he sat every morning seemed somehow smaller, quieter, as if something important had just been removed and no one realized it yet. For most people, Frank Holloway was just a forgotten old man on a park bench. But to Liam Carson, age 12, he was something else entirely. Liam lived just 2 blocks from Riverside Park. Every day after school, he passed through the park on his bike, cutting through the winding paths on his way home. At first, he was like everyone else, curious, maybe a little afraid of the quiet man under the tree. But unlike others, Liam stopped to watch. He noticed the small things, how Frank always folded his sleeping bag precisely, how he never left trash behind, and how he never asked anyone for anything. One day, after seeing Frank eat nothing but a crust of bread from a paper bag, Liam decided to do something about it. The next morning, he packed an extra peanut butter and jelly sandwich in his backpack. When school ended, he rode through the park slowly until he reached Frank's bench. He didn't say anything. He simply placed the sandwich in a brown bag near Frank's feet and pedaled away. Frank looked up, gave the faintest nod, and went back to staring at the sky. It became a habit. Every other day, Liam brought something small, half a sandwich, an apple, a granola bar. Frank never said no. He never said much at all. But Liam started to sense that the man wasn't just sitting there for no reason. There was always a strange sense of purpose in the way Frank carried himself. One afternoon, as autumn leaves blew through the park, Liam stayed a bit longer. He stood next to the bench watching as Frank stared into the clouds. Then his eyes fell to something on Frank's wrist, a frayed cloth bracelet faded with age and worn thin at the edges. It was simple, no more than a strip of fabric tied tightly, but Liam noticed a symbol embroidered on it, a shape like a falcon inside a triangle stitched in dark green thread. Curiosity got the better of him. "What's that?" Sir Liam asked, pointing to the bracelet. Frank looked down at it as if he'd forgotten it was there. Then for the first time in days, he smiled. "It's a gift," he said quietly. "From who?" Liam asked. Frank's voice was slow, like each word was being unburied. "My team," he said. "We each had one, made him ourselves, before we left." Left where Frank didn't answer. He just looked back at the sky and added, "Not all of us came home." Liam didn't ask more. He simply nodded, sat on his bike, and rode home. But the symbol stayed in his mind. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. He pulled out his tablet, opened a browser, and typed in everything he could remember. Falcon triangle patch, military cloth bracelet. Pages of results came up most irrelevant. But one image caught his eye. It was a grainy photo on an old military forum archived years ago. It showed a group of men in camouflage standing in front of a helicopter, all wearing identical cloth bracelets. The caption read, "Echo Unit 6, 1978. Last photo before Operation Rainfire." Liam clicked deeper. The more he searched, the more strange the story became. Echo Unit 6 had been a Special Forces reconnaissance team sent into Southeast Asia on a classified mission. According to the declassified portions of the report, the entire unit had vanished during the operation. Official records listed them as missing in action, presumed dead. No survivors were ever reported. The bracelet in the photo, exactly like Frank's. Liam stared at the screen in silence. Was it possible? Could the quiet man from the park, the one people mocked and ignored, be one of them, or worse? The last one. Liam didn't sleep much that night. But he knew one thing for sure: Frank Holloway was no ordinary homeless man. And whatever he had lived through wasn't over yet. Liam didn't keep what he'd discovered to himself. The very next morning, over a quiet breakfast of eggs and toast, he told his grandfather everything: the bracelet, the strange symbol, the search results, and the story of Echo Unit 6. His grandfather, Robert Carson, was a Vietnam veteran. He had served in the U.S. Army nearly 50 years ago and didn't speak much about his time overseas. But as Liam described the bracelet and the symbol stitched into it, Robert froze for it halfway to his mouth. "Say that again," he said. Liam repeated the details. Robert pushed his plate aside, stood up, and walked to the living room, where he kept an old wooden box, worn and dusty, covered with faded stickers from Army bases long closed. He opened it, pulled out a small bundle of papers, and flipped through them. After a few minutes, he pulled out a laminated page and handed it to Liam. "Look at the name at the bottom." Liam squinted. The print was faded, but he could just make it out: CPT Frank Holloway, Echo 6. Robert sat down slowly. "I thought he was dead," he murmured. "Everyone did." Then, without another word, he picked up the phone. He dialed a number from memory, one he hadn't used in years. "Eddie," he said. When the voice answered, "I need you to come down to Riverside Park. There's someone you need to see." Within an hour, Robert and Liam stood across the street from Frank's bench. The old man was seated exactly where he always was, motionless beneath the tree, eyes toward the sky. He didn't acknowledge them, but Robert didn't need him to. He raised his hand slowly and deliberately and saluted. Frank didn't return it, but his eyes shifted just briefly. That was enough. Word travels fast in a small town, especially when it begins with veterans. By that afternoon, two more elderly men appeared in the park, both wearing faded military ball caps. They stood in silence across the path from Frank, not speaking, not asking questions. After a few moments, each one offered a solemn salute before walking away. The next morning, 5 more came, then 7. By the end of the second day, there were over a dozen. Men who hadn't worn their uniforms in decades pulled them out of closets. They pressed old jackets, polished dusty pins. Quietly, they came one by one, or in small groups, and stood at attention before the man they now believed to be Captain Frank Holloway, the missing commander of Echo Unit 6. None of them spoke to him. None of them needed to. They just saluted, and in their eyes was a mixture of grief, honor, and reverence. Frank didn't speak. He didn't salute back. But he watched them all, his expression unreadable. The townspeople began to notice. Shoppers paused on their way to the farmer's market. Runners slowed their pace near the trees. Conversations quieted. Someone posted a blurry photo of Frank and the line of saluting veterans on Facebook, captioned simply, "Does anyone know who this man really is?" The post spread like wildfire. By sunset, half the town was whispering about him. Is he a war hero? Was he in some secret unit? I heard he saved a whole squad in Vietnam. I heard he was left behind by the government. Rumors turned into speculation. Speculation turned into awe. People who once crossed the street to avoid Frank now lingered near his bench. Some brought coffee, others just watched from a distance, unsure of what they were witnessing, but certain that something important was happening. And beneath the growing crowd, beneath the eyes of a town, waking up to a truth it had ignored, Frank Holloway sat as he always had, quiet, still, and waiting. The next morning began like any other. The sky was pale gray, still holding the last chill of early dawn. Riverside Park was just starting to come alive. Dog walkers, joggers, elderly couples enjoying their morning routines. Frank Holloway sat beneath his usual tree, silent and unmoving, as he had every day for years. But by 8:15 a.m., something had changed. It began with a sound distant at first like a rolling storm. Then it grew louder, deeper, heavier. The kind of sound that didn't just echo across rooftops, it rattled windows and made birds scatter in all directions. People turned their heads toward the horizon, shielding their eyes from the morning light. And then they saw it. A UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, matte black and massive, cut through the airspace above the town, descending low over the rooftops. It hovered briefly above Riverside Park, its blades kicking up dust leaves and startled voices. Children screamed in awe. Cars stopped in the street. Phones came out instantly, shaking in hands that couldn't believe what they were seeing. The helicopter slowly lowered itself into the wide field just past the old elm trees. Its landing gear touched the grass with a muffled thud. The blades slowed, but didn't stop. Then the side door opened. Out stepped four soldiers in full tactical gear. Their faces were unreadable behind tinted goggles. Each one moved with practiced precision, no wasted motion, no hesitation. They fanned out, forming a perimeter as if rehearsed. The dust still swirled around them, catching in the morning sun. Behind them, a fifth figure emerged. He wore a sharply pressed dress uniform, his chest heavy with medals and insignia. A man in his late 50s, upright and commanding, with silver at his temples and lines around his eyes, that told stories few had ever heard. The crowd had grown. Park-goers, local business owners, veterans from the day before, they all watched in stunned silence. Nobody dared speak. The officer didn't glance at the onlookers. He didn't break stride. He walked directly to where Frank sat, still, quiet, still, looking toward the sky as if he had been expecting this moment all along. When the officer reached him, he stopped. There was a brief pause. Then, with unmistakable reverence, the man removed his cap, lowered his head, and said, "Sir, we apologize for keeping you waiting." A breath caught in the crowd. Someone gasped. A child whispered, "Did he just say?" Sir Frank blinked slowly, then looked up into the officer's eyes. No words passed between them for several seconds, but the air seemed to shift. The past and present folded into each other. The silence between them felt heavier than the roar of the helicopter that had brought them there. One of the soldiers stepped forward, offering a folded cloth, a clean, newly issued service jacket. Frank didn't move at first. Then, almost reluctantly, he stood. He took the jacket and placed it carefully over his arm. His posture straightened, not stiffly, but with quiet dignity, the way a commander might stand after years of retreat. Then, wordlessly, he followed them. As they walked back toward the helicopter, the officer by his side, the entire crowd stood frozen. Some recorded, others lowered their phones, realizing instinctively that they were witnessing something far too sacred to be filtered through a screen. No one cheered, no one clapped. They just watched. As the ramp closed behind them and the Black Hawk lifted into the sky once more, the dust it left behind slowly settled over a town that would never see that bench the same way again. Because whatever they had once believed about that quiet old man, they now knew he had never been forgotten, just misplaced. Until now. The questions began almost immediately after the helicopter disappeared from the sky. News vans started arriving by noon. Local reporters set up in the park, speaking into cameras with wide eyes and hurried voices. Social media exploded with footage and blurry photos. The story was too unusual, too cinematic to ignore. But it wasn't until the Department of Defense held a press conference the following day that the full truth came to light. The podium was flanked by two American flags. A senior Pentagon spokesperson stood before the cameras, flanked by military officials. What began as a short statement turned into a historical correction that no one had expected. Yesterday, the spokesperson began the U.S. military successfully made contact with Captain Franklin T. Holloway, former commander of Echo Unit 6, a covert reconnaissance team, presumed lost during a classified operation in Southeast Asia in 1978. Murmurs filled the room. For over 45 years, the spokesperson continued. Captain Holloway was listed as missing in action, presumed dead after his team failed to return from a mission deep inside Laos during a period of volatile engagement near the end of the Vietnam conflict. What followed stunned not just reporters, but veterans across the country. According to declassified segments of the report, Captain Holloway's unit had been ambushed during the mission. 5 of his men were captured by enemy forces. With limited options, Holloway made a decision. Instead of retreating or signaling for extraction, he voluntarily disappeared, choosing to stay behind enemy lines in an attempt to rescue his team. For weeks, he tracked them, gathering intel and moving through enemy territory alone. Eventually, he succeeded in freeing 4 of the 5 captives. One had already been executed, but Holloway led the surviving men out through the jungle without radio contact, living off the land and evading capture. By the time they reached friendly forces, they were barely alive. But Captain Holloway refused to return with them. He handed off the survivors to a secondary unit and disappeared once again, this time into the jungle, choosing isolation over recognition. When pressed by the press corps on why the Pentagon spokesperson paused before answering, Captain Holloway suffered from what we now know as severe combat-related PTSD. At the time, it was not properly diagnosed, and like many veterans of his generation, he was uncomfortable receiving medals or being placed in the spotlight. He returned to the United States under a different identity, refused military assistance, and deliberately withdrew from public life. According to the report, he had been seen occasionally in different parts of the country, Montana, Texas, New Mexico, but never stayed in one place. He lived simply, often working odd jobs, refusing interviews, and keeping his identity hidden. It wasn't until a photograph of him circulated online standing beside the Black Hawk helicopter in Riverside Park that someone from military intelligence recognized the bracelet on his wrist, a unique cloth band made exclusively for members of Echo 6. That triggered a rapid investigation. Fingerprint records were cross-checked, DNA from an old Army file matched, and within hours, Frank Holloway was no longer Old Ghost. He was Captain Holloway, war hero, commander of one of the most elusive and revered units in military history. The nation had never even thanked him. Until now, as the press conference came to a close, one reporter asked, "Will he be awarded the Medal of Honor?" The spokesperson replied, "The department is currently reviewing that. But from what we've learned, Captain Holloway never wanted medals. He wanted peace." And that perhaps explained it all. He had returned not to be honored, but because his time in silence had run its course. Whether it was age weariness or the unfinished ghosts of a life lived in the shadows, something had brought him back. Not to be seen, but finally to be understood. Weeks passed, but the memory of what happened in Riverside Park didn't fade. Where Frank Holloway had once quietly sat beneath the old elm tree, the city installed a polished stone bench. It was simple but dignified, with a bronze plaque that read, "Frank Holloway, the silent keeper of peace." Beneath it, a small inscription in finer print, "For those who served without asking to be seen." Every morning just after sunrise, people began gathering near the bench. It started with a few veterans, some in uniform, some in street clothes, coming to pay their respects. Then teachers brought students lining up quietly beside the flagpole. A few brought their hands to their brows. Others simply stood in silence. What began as an unofficial tradition soon became a daily ritual. Liam Carson, now known throughout the community as the boy who helped uncover the truth, was asked to speak at the local school's Veterans Day assembly. He stood nervously on stage, his voice cracking slightly as he read from a sheet of paper. "My name is Liam," he began, "and I want to tell you about someone who didn't live in a big house or wear a shiny medal. He lived on a bench. He didn't talk much. People thought he had nothing, but really he had given everything." He held up a photo of the cloth bracelet. "Some heroes don't wear armor," he continued. "Some don't even want to be called heroes. Some just carry a sleeping bag and eyes that have seen too much and ask for nothing in return." The gymnasium was silent. Parents, students, and veterans alike stood in quiet reflection as Liam finished. We walked past him for years. We never looked. But he never stopped watching over us. And now that we finally see him, let's never forget him. Frank Holloway was gone again somewhere in the care of the military that once lost track of him. But his legacy had taken root in the heart of the town, not through speeches or parades, but through a simple bench and a story no one would ignore again. In a time where appearances often shape our opinions, this story challenges us to slow down and ask, who are we overlooking? The veteran in line behind us, the janitor at the school, the elderly man at the diner. How many have served, sacrificed, and quietly faded into the background? For older generations, this story hits close to home. You've lived through eras of change, of service, of dignity, earned without applause. Perhaps you've known someone like Frank, or perhaps you were someone like him. But for younger audiences too, it offers a lesson, the value of respect, listening, and never judging too quickly. So we ask you, have you ever met a Frank Holloway in your life? Someone who seemed invisible until you saw them clearly? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us your story. Let others know these moments still matter. And if this story touched your heart, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and helping us continue to bring forgotten voices back into the light. Because stories like Frank's deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.